Hey guys, Ruckus Gaming here, coming at you with another episode of Tuesday Tips and Tricks. Today we are going to continue our tier list series, and we are going to talk about uncommon Ironclad cards. So, without further ado, let's just jump straight into it. First up, we have the uncommon skill, Battle Trance. You get this unupgraded. This will allow you to draw 3. If you upgrade it, it will allow you to draw 4. And the unfortunate drawback is that it means you can no longer draw cards for the rest of your turn, whether that's through cards like Shrug It Off or Pommel Strike, or from a relic like Ink Bottle or Gremlin Horn, etc. I really like this card a lot. I think that Ironclad loves having a lot of draw in a deck. I mean, every deck really, every character really just likes to see more cards. But for Ironclad, especially if you get something going with Corruption, but you don't have a Dark Embrace, you really want some draw, and Battle Trance is great for that. The unfortunate side is that it also does end any further draw. So if you draw into a Shrug, or you draw into a Pommel Strike, something like that, it's just not going to do what you want. So for that reason, it's only A tier for me. Still very solid card, like it a lot though. Next up, we have the uncommon attack, Blood for Blood. This 4-cost attack does 18 damage unupgraded, but upgraded to 22 damage, and it lowers the cost to 3 energy. As a bonus, every time you take damage, it will lower the cost even further. Taking damage is something that Ironclad likes to do because of its starting relic. He heals HP naturally, so he is not afraid to take damage. So this is a very natural synergy. It is very decent early damage. If this is the first uncommon attack you see, this is a great option. It does require you not necessarily to take damage, but also just to take several turns usually, or you take significant amounts of damage. It would be really nice if you could just work it out to only take 1 damage every time, but that's usually not what happens. And it's slow. It usually needs to be drawn once before it's actually playable. You know, when you get it at 3 or 4 energy, you don't always want to play it yet. You want to take more damage yet, so you have to wait and reshuffle a little slow. So for that reason, still very solid, but I say mid A tier. Very solid early damage card, definitely very takeable. Next up, we have Bloodletting, and I think there might be a small error on this card. Maybe it's from an older version, but it says gain 1 energy. It should say gain 2 energy, and upgraded, it goes to 3 energy. So losing HP to gain energy, that is an S tier card. I will take every Bloodletting that I see. The Ironclad has a lot of expensive cards that he likes to play. A lot of 2-cost attacks, a lot of 3-cost powers. So you always feel energy hungry on the Ironclad. And with your starting relic healing you every combat, this feels like at least 4 free energy per combat if you can draw it and play it twice. So always a huge benefit, and if you get a little bit of healing, you're set. Next up, we have the skill Burning Pact. Exhaust 1 card to draw 2, or upgrade to draw 3. This is another absolutely fantastic card I love in just about every deck I make, and for that reason, I'm putting it up in S tier as well. Not a lot to say, I guess, about this one. It's very straightforward. You just get the strikes and defends and statuses and curses out of your deck. You draw more cards. You swim your deck so you can draw your good cards that you want to keep even faster in the future, so your deck speeds up over time. That kind of scaling is very unique to Ironclad. He's the only character that really relies on having exhaust as a main mechanic, and his deck actually scaling by playing faster over time. That's a very interesting and unique thing about Ironclad that you may not immediately realize, and something that's very central to his kind of core fantasy, and also just how he is intended to be played and how he kind of works. So exhausting away bad cards, drawing, playing lots of cards, and playing them more often is exactly what he wants to be doing. So for that reason, Burning Pact, S tier. Next up, we have the uncommon attack Carnage. Unupgraded, it does 20 damage, upgrades to 28 damage, one of Ironclad's many 2-cost attacks. Very solid if you see it early. This can be great in Act 1 for solving hallway fights quickly. The drawback isn't necessarily a huge drawback. It is ethereal, which means if you don't play it and you cannot move it out of your hand, perhaps with discarding or maybe even something like Warcry back into your draw pile, it's going to exhaust out and you'll never be able to play it. Exhausting cards is not bad for Ironclad by any means, but it does feel bad to have big damage exhaust before you have any chance to play it. It feels just like a wasted draw. It's kind of like drawing a void or a wound or something like that, some kind of curse. It's basically a brick if you don't play it. I always feel like I want this card to be better than it really is, and unfortunately it doesn't scale very well. So outside of mid-act 2, once the HP starts to really pump up, the damage isn't even that great, and I end up wanting to play other 2-cost attacks more, or 2-cost powers more. So for those reasons, I'm going to throw Carnage in C. Next up, we have our first uncommon power, Combust. At the end of each turn, take 1 damage and deal 5 to all enemies, or 7 upgraded. I will say that perhaps this is just my own misunderstandings or failings as a person, but I just don't really get Combust. It does work with Rupture, which is nice, but apart from that, I just feel like it's not ever an option I'm very interested in. I've taken it a couple times, and with Rupture, it's fine, but outside of that, I don't really see a big need to take it, especially when you can get something like Mercury Hourglass for free. So I just put this in D tier. Not a big fan of Combust. Our next power, however, is very different. It is Dark Embrace. 2 energy to draw 1 card every time you exhaust. Upgrade to 1 energy, and I'm placing this right at the top of A tier, or S tier. My apologies, S tier, because of the amount of cards that say exhaust on them in his pool. You're never going to have a deck that doesn't exhaust. There's always going to be something that exhausts. Even if it's a little bit, it's probably worth taking a Dark Embrace. Having cards exhaust and draw, quickly playing your best cards as many times as you can is how Ironclad tends to win. And that's how most characters tend to win. So that's why cycling a deck quickly with Defect or the Silent, or going infinite on the Watcher is so powerful. And Dark Embrace is just something that helps you do that very, very well, very easily. And with an upgrade especially, only 1 energy makes it very easy to play. Great if you have a Snecko as well. So I'm a big, big fan of Dark Embrace, as everyone should be. Next up, we have Disarm. This will remove 2 strength from enemies, 3 if upgraded. And this might perhaps upset some people, but I think at the end of the day, I'm just going to keep it at the very tippy top of A tier. It is not quite S tier for me. I think the biggest problem you run into with this are the enemies that have multiple stacks of artifact. And while this can be really good on some enemies that have really nasty multi-attacks that you can negate very easily with this, including the heart, if you can get rid of those artifact stacks or the very beginning of the combat before it has artifact, it's very nice. But a lot of times you do have to deal with artifact, and if you don't have proper support with debuffs from other cards, perhaps from an uppercut, or, you know, even colorless cards like blind or trip, etc., then it feels very bad to draw it, because it feels like you're either wasting it by not playing it, or you're wasting it by playing it and only removing an artifact charge instead of actually getting use out of it. So another reason is just that I think if everything is S tier, everything is A tier, it kind of becomes meaningless. I do want to have a little bit of a decent spread. I don't want everything to be at the top and have like 2 or 3 D tier cards. There should be an even spread or a distribution of these cards. So I'm trying to balance it out, and we'll see at the end how that looks like. Next up, we have Drop Kick. You deal 5 damage or 7 upgraded, and if the enemy is vulnerable, you can gain 1 energy and draw a card. This is another one of those cards that I always feel like I want to be really good. You always get the idea if you have 1 more drop kick, you can go infinite. And while that's technically possible, for some reason you just never often see that other drop kick. And it just isn't ever as good as you want it to be. It's 1 draw and 1 energy per turn sometimes, if you've got the status on it. And if you've got an uppercut, if you've got shockwave, etc., it might be pretty easy to get off multiple times. But if the only vulnerability that you have is bash, then it might be kind of tough to get it off, especially if it's not upgraded yet. So for those reasons, I'm just putting it at the top of D tier. It's not as bad as Combust, but it's not great. Even if you do get the infinite, it's going to be one of the slowest, most painful infinites in the world. Next up, we have Dual Wield, a very interesting skill that allows you to copy an attack or a power, but not a skill, and to place copies of it into your hand. 1 copy unupgraded or 2 copies upgraded. I think initially, as a less experienced player, I didn't really see why this might be good, but I've grown to really enjoy it from time to time. Not every single time, but there are a couple times or a couple different situations where Dual Wield really shines. And I'm going to put it squarely in B tier. I think Ironclad does benefit from having more than 1 copy of some of his attacks, and especially some of his powers. Sometimes you really want multiple Feel No Pains. Sometimes you really want a multiple of Eruption, or not Eruption, sorry, Rupture. So you gain more strength, or Inflame, so you gain more strength, etc. And instead of going to multiple combats and getting multiple card rewards, this can be a shortcut. And it can be flexible, it can be used on attacks, it can be used on powers, so you have different ways which you can use it, which is key to being a useful, valuable card in more situations, rather than having 1 very strict, defined role. The only problem is energy, I would say. So if you're copying uppercuts or if you're copying heavy blades, it's going to be a little bit harder to get all of those off than if you have some 0 cost attacks or 1 cost attacks, or if you've got lots of energy perhaps, then you can start getting some big hitting cards. It's great with things like Reaper. Basically means you have infinite heals. The dual wield itself does not exhaust, so you could just keep recreating Reapers as long as you could stall a fight. Very easy to do in Act 3 against something especially like Darklings. Next up we have Entrench, which simply says to double your block. 2 cost card, and it upgrades to 1 cost. I think it's got a great upgrade. Having 2 cost for this card is really hard to make it easy to play. You won't be able to build up necessarily a lot of block before you have to pay this 2 energy. So upgrading it to 1 is a huge deal. Also, just being able to create enough block for this to be meaningful is a huge deal. So you need to be able to have lots of energy, play lots of cards, build up lots of block, and then also keep it, either with Barricade or Calipers or something like that. And just because of the simple amount of support that I think you need to really want to take this, that makes it a C tier card for me. Another one of those interesting situations, just like we had with Heavy Blade, where, you know, with enough strength, this card can win you the run. This is basically Body Slam as a skill. Body Slam could win as your attack if you've got all of the things you need to build a very efficient blocking deck. Entrench is part of that, and it's probably one of the biggest parts of that, because doubling your block, once you keep it, once you have that Barricade, once you have those Calipers, means that you can quickly get hundreds and hundreds in block up to the cap of 999, at which point you have one, and it's just up to you how long you want it to last. But because it does require all of those other things to happen, you just don't often see all of those things put together in one run. You can't always see an Entrench that you want. Unupgraded without those other things, you just look at it and go, I wish I could. Next up we have the Power Evolve. For every status card you draw 1, upgrade to draw 2. I am going to put this at the bottom of C tier. This is only really good if you know you are going to see enemies soon who are going to put statuses in your deck. That could be an Act 1 Slime Boss. Maybe you've seen an Act 1 Elite and you know that you have a 50-50 to see sentries next. Might be takeable in those situations. The problem is that if you're taking this over taking damage, that's still probably worse than taking the damage. So even if Evolve is good for the Sentries fight, even if Evolve is good for Hexaghost, you still have to think that by taking a damage card instead of this, you'd probably be ending the combat faster. You don't really want to spend lots of time drawing lots of dazed against sentries, for example. So it's never going to be a card you're really excited to pick unless you already happen to have a Wild Strike, unless you already happen to have a Reckless Charge or a Power Through for whatever reason. Unless you have some very, very specific pieces very, very quickly, it's just not very often takeable. And many of the things that you need to make it takeable are also often not takeable. So C at best, maybe not even C, to be honest. Next up we have Feel No Pain. Whenever you exhaust a card, gain 3 block, upgrade to gain 4 block, And this is the exact opposite of our last card. And it is the tippy top best uncommon card that Ironclad has. By far, no question in my mind. Because of the amount of cards that exhaust, Feel No Pain is one of his main late game block solutions. There are many turns where you need to have 30, 40, 50, even 60 block in a single turn, and you don't have a lot of turns to do setup. So you need a quick way to get there where it doesn't rely super hard or very closely with getting a specific draw order. If you need to draw 2 or 3 cards to get your setup and play them in order, it's not that great. But Feel No Pain is a pretty quick, easy solution. And then it can also snowball into bigger solutions, you know, by playing a barricade afterwards. But you don't need a barricade for Feel No Pain to be good. That's what I'm saying. Anyway, it's just one of those cards that you're always happy to see in any kind of Ironclad deck. And you'll probably even want multiple copies of it. So playing it with a dual wield or even taking multiple copies of it in your deck. Upgraded, it is very nice, but I don't think it is necessary. I think that's also another reason why I put it one spot higher than Dark Embrace. You don't necessarily want as many Dark Embraces because of the cost and because of hand size. You can get to a point, especially if you have something like a Dead Branch where you're exhausting and creating and drawing. Your hand is going to clog very quickly, so having more Dark Embraces isn't always going to do more for you in the same way that there's really no end to the benefit of Feel No Pain. The more Feel No Pains you have, the better you are. Next up, we have Fire Breathing, which does 6 or upgrades to 10 damage to all enemies whenever you draw a status or a curse. Very, very similar to Evolved for many, many reasons. So without spending a lot of time elaborating and beating a dead horse about why these cards are not that great, I'll just put it right next to Evolved. Slightly higher because it is damage. So for that reason, if you saw both of these, I might take the Fire Breathing above the Evolve, just because it's damage. But they're pretty much the same. They need a lot of support. You often don't want to take that support. You often feel forced into this. You're never really excited unless you have some very specific things fall into place quickly, very early on. Next up, we have Flame Barrier. This will gain 12 block and deal 4 damage back to attackers. Upgrade to 16 block and 6 damage to attackers. This is a card that I really like a lot. Maybe a little too much, honestly. It feels really good when you have it against the birds especially, and other multi-attacking annoying enemies such as the snake plant, such as the floating orb baseball guy, whatever his name is, I don't remember. Even for the heart, feels really good. I think it's just okay though, and I'm gonna put it at the top of B tier. I think outside of those moments where it really shines, it's just kind of like, yeah, all right. It's kind of expensive, so if you are energy hungry, you don't have a corruption yet, then this can be a little tough to get into play. Sometimes you feel like you just have to play it, and you don't have a lot of choice, because it is a decent amount of block, and it does deal damage. So it often feels like you are just being forced into playing this card, because it is very valuable, but the cost makes it hard to play if you also want to play other things. So you're stuck choosing between them, essentially. Next up is Ghostly Armor. This ethereal card will gain 10 block and upgrades to 13. I think it's alright. It's fine. Ethereal cards are not my favorite, I guess. I would say that it's not bad that it's out of the way, because you often like to exhaust anyway as Ironclad. It does sometimes feel like a waste to draw it and to not play it, but the fact that it is 1 energy and that it is block, not a big attack, I actually think it makes it easier to take and easier to use. So for those reasons, I'm going to put it at the bottom of B tier. A little bit better than its attack cousin Carnage. Next up we have Hemokinesis. Lose 2 HP to do 15 damage or upgrade to 20 damage. This is one of my favorite attacks. It's only 1 cost, upgrades to a very chunky damage card, and if you're only losing 2 HP, that means you can use this 3 times for free every combat with your Ironclad starting relic, healing you 6 HP every combat. So you do have to make sure that if you have multiple copies of this, or if you play it many times, that you do have a little bit of healing support. I think it is easy to overuse this, but early on, I think you'll save HP by playing it instead of letting combats go a little bit longer and taking more turns. For those reasons, I will put it at the top of A tier. Next up, we have Infernal Blade. This is a skill, but it will generate an attack for free. Always an Ironclad attack, of course. And this is the definition of what I call a ho-hum card. Like, it's just alright, I guess. It gives you some random thing, which could be good. It could not be good also. It's going to be better than a strike. I mean, there's that. If you get it upgraded, it's 0 cost. A little more playable. It's just a free attack. But it's not something like you're going to build your deck around. It's just a random little fun attack every turn or every combat. See what it is. Sometimes might be something really good to end a combat quickly. Also, sometimes might be, drop kick. So for that reason, put that right into the square bottom, the absolute middle of the list of B tier. Intimidate will apply 1 stack of weak to all enemies, 2 stacks if upgraded. This is an okay skill. I don't think it's something that you're going to take on early. I think this is something you might take mid-act 2 to add on. It's just okay. I think there are a lot of other skills you would prefer to have. This might be kind of a desperation skill, or it also could be just, I have corruption and I want more skills kind of skill. For that reason, I'm going to put this close to the bottom of B tier. Maybe a little bit below Ghostly Armor, but better than Infernal Blade. Next up is Inflame. This 1 cost power will give you 2 strength. Upgraded to 2 strength, I'm going to throw this bad boy right in the top of S tier. This is a very, very consistent, strong, valuable power that Ironclad loves to see. Lots of his attacks do multi-attacks. Lots of his skills scale up your strength. So with you having more strength means doing more damage per hit, means ending combats faster, especially if there are multiple enemies and you have something like a whirlwind, even something like a sword boomerang, can be really, really strong with enough strength. And because there's no conditions, it's not if the enemy's attacking, it's not temporary, it's just always what it is. Very reliable, you know exactly what you're getting with Inflame. S tier power for uncommons. Next up is Metallicize, a 1-cost power that gives you 3 block at the end of your turn, 4 if you upgrade it. I think that this is a power that is often underrated. I think that people don't realize how good Metallicize is. The buff itself, as opposed to something like Plated Armor, which disappears if you are hit and take damage. Metallicize always sticks around, so it's actually quite useful. And it can be the big difference between, you know, blocking 5 and taking 2 or 3, or playing 2 defense and taking 2 energy. You know, you're playing more defense and you're not playing attacks. So it is a way of making sure that you can play more attacks to kill faster, actually. It still does need a little bit of support around it. It's not really the main piece. It's not really going to win a run for you in a way that other powers, other attacks, other skills do. It's just a very silent workhorse that gets its job done. Does it very nicely, but it's not like a massive game changer. So for those reasons, I will put it in the middle of B tier. Next up is Power Through. Gain 15 or up to 20 block upgraded, but add 2 wounds directly into your hand. The interesting part is the wounds are added directly into your hand now, which is actually probably the best place for them to be put. It's very common for statuses to be put in the discard pile, which is more desirable because it means it will take you longer to see them. The worst is for it to be put in the draw pile, which means you will see it very soon. But if you can put it into your hand, that does leave you the option of dealing with that in some way. Perhaps a Fiend Fire, a Second Wind, a Sever Soul, True Grit, etc. So you're actually not even paying much of a cost by adding these immediately to your hand if you can get rid of them immediately. So the downside of this is nowhere near as bad as it looks. There are cards that you will see that if you have this become much more takeable, such as a Fire Breathing, Evolved, Wild Strike, etc. I think it's a very solid block card. 15 to 20 block is not nothing, and only for 1 energy. I'm actually putting it in B tier, slightly below dual wield. Next up, we have Pummel. This will do 2 damage 4 times, upgraded to 2 damage 5 times, and then exhaust out of your deck. I think that this is a card I slept on for a long time. I looked at that 2 damage 4 times and thought, ugh, yuck, 8 damage, who cares? But then I played more Ironclad and I realized when you start scaling up his strength, that 2 damage 4 times or 2 damage 5 times can quickly become your win condition, actually. If you've got strength, if you've got some vulnerability, if you've got sustained scaling, if every turn you're getting more strength, even through, you know, Demon Form, Limit Break, Spot Weakness, whatever, if you've got enough strength in your deck that you're just always getting strength, Pummel is quickly going to become your knockout card. And you may actually choose not to play it early on and wait for it to get bigger so you can finish the job. I love this attack. Still going to put it in B tier just because of how slow it is. It does need lots of support. it does need you to not play it. It's just a one-hit KO kind of thing, or maybe it's just a I want block or draw with Feel No Pain or Dark Embrace kind of thing. So in those cases, the damage it does, maybe you're not scaling up your strength quite so much. It's not going to be a powerful hitter for you, but you can still get something out of it. Solid top of B tier card. Next up, we have Rage. This free skill will give you 3 block for every attack played. Upgrades to every attack, giving 5 block. I think this is a card that I often want to be better than it is. I think sometimes if you don't have the necessary draw and the necessary energy to accommodate it, it's a little underwhelming. So I'm going to put this in the middle of B tier. It can be 5, 10 to 15 block pretty reliably, and most of the time that's probably enough, but there are some combats where that's not going to get it done, where you're going to need a big hand, a big turn for this to really shine, but it can happen. Next up, we have Rampage. When you play this card, it will scale itself up to be stronger. It starts at 5, upgrades to 8 every time you play it. This is Ironclad's version of Claw, if you will, and it is really, really bad. This is a D tier attack. Unlike Claw, it only scales itself. It does not scale other Rampages, so you don't benefit by having more than one. Having more than one is actually objectively worse than only having one. So it's a card you only want one of. The upgrade is okay, it's not bad, but at the same time, you need to design your deck almost entirely around this single card. Much in the way when you have a Searing Blow, you have to spend all of your campfires always upgrading Searing Blow for that really to be a viable strategy. You can't really waste upgrades anywhere else. You can't waste card plays on anything else when you have Rampage. You always need to be playing Rampage. So you need to be drawing it all the time. Small, slim deck, lots of energy, lots of draw. It's just not worth trying to force a run to be that. It can happen, but it's just not likely to be pieced together in a way that makes this card often useful. Next up, we have Reckless Charge. This 0-cost attack does 7 damage, upgraded to 10. But it will put a Dazed into your draw pile. So for that reason, D tier. Not nearly as bad as Rampage, actually. This works with things like Fire Breathing and Evolve nicely. This could be a reason you take those. This is still what I would say is a desperation pick for damage early on. You don't really want this to be what you're going with, but sometimes it's what you're offered. The Dazed going into your draw pile is very bad. That's really bad. And if you haven't already played your Fire Breathing and Evolved and you draw those statuses before you draw your powers, that's very bad. And that's essentially why I often am not a big fan of those kinds of cards. Fire Breathing, Evolved, etc. They require you to draw cards in a certain order, and if you don't draw them in that order, then that means you need to reshuffle and redraw. You need to extend the combat for several more turns. That's more opportunity for further bad draw, to lose HP that is unnecessary, yada yada yada. So when people talk about cards being slow, they take a long time, that's why that's bad. Next up, we have Rupture. And this one breaks my heart because I actually love Rupture. Every time you take damage from a card, gain 1 strength, upgrades to gain 2 strength. I love the idea of it. I love the fantasy of, you know, gaining strength by taking damage. It's such a cool mechanic. It is a little bit slow. It does require you to draw and play this before you get those other cards like Bloodletting or Hemokinesis. There we go. So it can be a bit slow. It doesn't always happen in the order you want. Very heartbreaking. I wish it could be a little bit better than it is. I think it's only top of C tier. There are a lot of Ironclad decks that are just not going to have Bloodletting or Hemokinesis in it, or Combust, etc. Or even curses like Pain could work with this, but you're just not always going to see those in a run. You don't always need to rely on self-damaging cards. You can build a lot of decks without them and still be pretty good. So, not as always takeable as something like a Feel No Pain. Just always going to be good because you always exhaust. You're just not always going to have the cards you need for Rupture to be takeable. If you already got a Bloodletting, if you've already got a Hemokinesis, that's a great start. If you've got an Offering, yeah, you should definitely take a Rupture if you see it. But if you see a Rupture first, I wouldn't take it without the other things. It's like taking Accuracy on the Silent before you have Shivs. It's just not a high percentage play. Next up, we have Searing Blow, and I alluded to this a little earlier, being that the win condition for Searing Blow decks is always so narrow. You only have one option at every campfire, and it's to just continue upgrading Searing Blow. Nothing really synergizes with it, not even strength. Just more energy, more draw, play it as often as possible, get it back into your draw pile with Headbutt, etc. D tier. I will say maybe a little more fun than than Rampage. Maybe a little more fun, a little more wacky, a little more silly, just because they're more unique. It's not just playing the same card a lot, but upgrading the same card a lot and getting that number really high is a lot more fun. Rampage and Claw runs, you know, you play the same cards a lot to make the number go up. But it's not upgrading. That is something very unique to Searing Blow. So just for that uniqueness, I'm putting it above the Rampage. Next up is Second Wind. This will exhaust all of the non-attack cards in your hand. And this will give you 5 or 7 when upgraded block for each card you exhaust. I am putting that right in the top middle of A tier. This is one of my favorite block options for the Ironclad. It works very well with Feel No Pain or without it. And the same goes for Dark Embrace. I love it with Dark Embrace even more, actually. This is great for getting out curses and statuses that bosses and elites may give you. And it can just be a normal way of getting out some of your defense or some of your powers you maybe don't need, like a Infernal Blade or, you know, a dual wield you're not using anymore. Whatever, just get it out of there, block. And it is a central piece to some of those decks, like Barricade block deck that uses Body Slam. This is a fast way to build block, but it's also something that works in other decks. So it's not like you only take this if you're going the Barricade direction. This fits very nicely into a wide variety of decks. This can even be something that helps you go infinite. It works the same way as, you know, Sever Soul, basically. And very, very solid card. Always happy to see a second win. Seeing Red is our next card. You pay 1 energy to get 2 energy, and it exhausts. Upgrades to 0 cost, so 2 free energy. This is another one of those okay, I guess, and I'm just gonna put this at the tippy top of C tier. Kind of very much the same as Infernal Blade. Like, more energy is never bad. I'm not gonna complain about it, but paying 1 energy to get 2 energy, it's a little silly, feels like. Upgraded is much better. I don't know if I would take it without an upgrade, especially if I already had upgrades that I was already planning on going to get at campfires in the near future anyway. I probably would not upgrade this over those. It's just like, okay, nice, a little boost. You really love it when you see it come out of a dead branch. That's when you're really happy to see this. If you've got Corruption Dead Branch, you love a Seeing Red because it's more draw, technically, card creation, and more energy. If you've got Feel No Pain, Dark Embrace, it can also be just good block and draw in a general sense. But, you know, you don't get excited for a Seeing Red. It's just kind of like, okay. Sentinel gives you 5 block and 2 energy. If you exhaust it, upgrade it to 8 block and 3 energy. This is basically really good if you have Corruption, or if you have other cards that exhaust, like True Grit, Sever Soul, Second Wind, etc. It'll give you block and energy. If you can exhaust it, you may also get some Feel No Pain or Dark Embrace value out of it. That being said, it is kind of just sort of like, it is what it is. If you don't already have those things, you're not going to take this just for the block. It's basically just a defend. It's only good if you have those exhaust tools. And many times it's just icing on top of the cake. It's a win more card. I'm going to put it C tier right next to Rupture. In the right deck, it can be great, but it takes a lot of things to happen, and it's just that doesn't always come together like you want. Next up, we have Sever Soul. This will exhaust all non-attack cards in your hand and deal 16, upgraded to 22 damage. Next up, we have Sever Soul. This will exhaust all non-attack cards in your hand and then do 16, upgraded to 22 damage. I have to say, despite the function that it grants, the benefit of exhausting things like statuses, curses, etc., even working with things like Sentinel, I actually hate this card. This has got to be one of my least favorite Ironclad attacks of all time. I put that at the bottom of D tier. I think there are so many other Ironclad cards that do the same thing but better. They have Fiend Fire, you know, you've got True Grit, you've got Second Wind, all of those other ways of exhausting cards out of your hand. And this is a 2-cost attack that only does single target damage, and it's okay. It's not great. It doesn't scale great with strength like you really want to do with Ironclad. Like a Fiend Fire would be amazing. 2-cost attack, even single target, because it scales with strength. But this is a 2-cost attack that is only 1 attack, so it doesn't scale with strength very well. Just doesn't get the job done. You never really want to play this. It's a desperation pick every time. Next up, we have Shock Wave. This will apply 3 weakened vulnerable to all enemies. Upgrade to 5 vulnerable and weak to all enemies. I'm a huge fan of Shock Wave. Another one of those cards that I think you can pretty much take in any deck and always be happy. You love the debuff removes. It's great for getting rid of artifact. Even if it is a little expensive, a lot of Ironclad's best cards are expensive. You should have energy to deal with it. You can upgrade it, and I think it's a great way to make sure that you have enough weak and vulnerable to last an entire combat. But you don't necessarily need to upgrade it either, because you do have other ways of getting vulnerable and weak. You know, you've got your uppercuts, you've got blind, you've got trip, etc. So you don't need to rely on only this. It can be a great way to get it started, to get rid of the artifact, to get the first couple stacks going. But just an all-around very solid card, and is a great way to both end combats quicker by killing your enemies and survive longer by blocking more, by preventing them from doing damage with your weaken. Next up, we have a spot weakness. I know the joke is commonly that whenever you take a spot weakness, it means you're going to be drawing it whenever the enemy is not attacking. The drawback of spot weakness, it will give you 3 or 4 strength when upgraded, but only if the target is attacking. So if they're not attacking, obviously this doesn't do you any good, and you've just drawn a brick. I, however, am still of the opinion that this is a bottom of A tier card. I think this is still very often and reliable strength. Obviously, you don't always have 100% say about when you draw this and what turn, but knowing general enemy attack patterns and knowing how big your draw pile is or what cards you have to draw with in your hand, you can make a lot of just simple choices that will make this easier to play. In multi-enemy combats, it's great because you're going to have more opportunities to be attacked. It's even good with Runic Dome. You can use this to cheat and to see if an enemy is attacking you, even though they will not show their intent. If you play this card, your character's reaction will tell you either they gained the strength and they are attacking, or they didn't gain strength and they are not attacking. So even little fun stuff like that makes spot weakness useful. The amount of strength it gives is very good. It can scale up very quickly. It works great with limit break. And if you've already got a little bit of strength, spot weakness can be like all you need. 1 inflame, 1 spot weakness, you're probably fine, honestly. But, you know, getting a limit break on top of that, even better. Next up, we have Uppercut. This 2-cost attack will deal 13 damage and apply 1 weak and 1 vulnerable. If you upgrade it, it will apply 2 stacks of weak and 2 stacks of vulnerable. I think this is one of Ironclad's best attack cards. I'm throwing this at the top of A tier. I love the multiple stacks of weak and vulnerable. I love that it gives both. It's amazing for removing artifact charges. It does require an upgrade. I've always said this, if you have a card of any kind that gives some debuff like weak or vulnerable, if it only gives 1, the upgrade really needs to give 2 if you want it to be a valuable high tier card. If you don't upgrade the amount of stacks it gives you, you're really limiting its usefulness. But thankfully, upgrading Uppercut does give you extra stacks. It doesn't increase the damage, but we don't care about that. It's not that important. That's not why we like Uppercut. And finally, last up, one of our favorites, Whirlwind. There's nothing really special about this card. It's very simple. It's an X cost card that will just do 5 to 8 upgraded damage for each enemy. And sometimes that's just so good. If you've got a little bit of strength, if you've got a little bit of extra energy, this can make a lot of very annoying fights so easy. I'm talking about birds, I'm talking about slavers, talking gremlin gang, gremlin leader, darklings, all that stuff. Whirlwind is such a great solution. And I think a lot of the things you already want to take in almost every Ironclad deck, you want more strength, you want more energy, those all make Whirlwind better anyway. I still don't think it's necessarily going to be like, oh my god, this is my win condition, this is my big blapper, this is my trump card, this is my winner. It's just a very, very solid workhorse. I think you're often going to be choosing not to play it. I think the X cost does mean you often don't want to play it. You don't want to use all of your energy doing this unless you can kill everyone. When you can do that, that's great, but you probably can't always do that, especially not in Act 3 when they get a little bit higher HP. You need to set up first. So it is a little bit slow. Does mean you need to wait on it, but always happy to see it, always going to take it. Tippy top of B tier for me. So that is the tier list, guys. Thanks for tuning in and sticking around all the way to the end. We obviously have one more video left in the series. Next week we will be doing the Ironclad Rares. And then we will be moving on. I don't want to do too many tier list videos in a row. We will be doing something different, but we will also definitely be coming back to this and doing all of the characters in their own time. Please drop a like, share, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff down below. Let me know if you have any questions, anything you want to see in a video. I love reading the comments, and I am always happy to see those new subscribers. It's always good to know that people are interested in watching what you want to show and say to them. So, as always, thanks for watching so much. Have a great day, and thanks for watching Ruckus Gaming.